Part 1 opens the survival issue. Imagine the year 1250. In a small village outside Bergen, Norway, the sun hasn't appeared for weeks, temperatures have dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, and snow presses against your log cabin nearly up to the roof. No electricity, no gas, no backup heat. In this world, firewood is not comfort, it's survival. For medieval families, the hearth was the center. It provides light, warmth, and the only way to cook, but also carries a constant threat. If your firewood fails, so do you. A smoking log on a cold night can lead to illness, frostbite, or worse. Surprisingly, today, despite having moisture meters, weather apps, and modern tools, many of us still can't maintain a clean fire. We throw a log into the stove, and instead of the warm sound of burning, we get steam, smoke, and frustration. So what did medieval peasants understand that we've forgotten? How did they dry wood perfectly over 8 long months in some of the coldest and wettest climates on Earth, without plastic tarps, without kiln, without modern technology? They knew a science of wood, air, and heat that we today barely recognize. And in this episode, we'll explore that forgotten thermodynamics, the same knowledge that once kept entire villages alive through harsh winters, and can also help us cut down modern energy bills. Welcome to the forgotten science of fire that kept medieval families alive. Let's start part 2, the modern sizzle, why your wood is wet. Now step out of the medieval longhouse and into your backyard. Picture this familiar scene. You chop wood in spring, stack it neatly, pull a heavy plastic tarp over it, and walk away feeling proud of a job well done. But 8 months later, when winter finally bites, you throw a log into the fire, and instead of a satisfying blaze, you hear a weak sizzle. The log sweats, the stove smokes, and the room fills with frustration instead of warmth. This isn't bad luck. It's modern thermodynamics failing right in your hands. The truth is that most firewood today is stored in ways that medieval peasants would never trust. Wood is hygroscopic, a living sponge long after the tree is dead. It absorbs moisture not only from rain, but from dew, from the ground, and even from moist air. And once wet, it retains that moisture much longer than we think. Modern studies confirm that firewood left out in the air, even if covered from above, typically has a moisture content of 25 to 30% after a whole year, which may not sound serious, but thermodynamically, it is a disaster. For clean and efficient burning, wood needs a moisture content below 20%. Above that, the fire will expend most of its energy boiling water, instead of generating heat. Every kilogram of water hidden inside your log takes away more than 2 megajoules of energy just to turn into steam. So instead of heating your home, you are vaporizing your time, fuel, and money. But the consequences don't stop there. Wet wood produces creosote, a sticky black residue that clings to the inside of the chimney. When the fire burns too cool, over time, that buildup becomes the silent villain of winter, a spark, a hot ember. And creosote can ignite like gasoline, rushing up the chimney and engulfing the entire house in minutes. Medieval families understood this danger well. For them, a chimney fire was not an inconvenience or a repair bill. It was a life or death disaster, and so they did not gamble with their fuel. They did not accept fresh logs or wet wood piles. They designed their villages, sheds, and even homes around one core principle. Dry wood means survival. Wet wood means danger. And in the next chapter, we will explore how they used walls, wind, and a bit of ingenious physics to keep their fuel dry. Through rain, through snow, and through some of the harshest winters ever recorded. Part 3, the lean-to shed. First thermodynamics tip. To understand how medieval families kept their firewood perfectly dry, you must closely examine the archaeological traces they left behind. Across medieval Germany, Switzerland, and the icy north of Scandinavia, one pattern appears repeatedly. They almost never stored firewood in a solitary shed out in the yard. Instead, they built what historians today call a lean-to shed, attached to the house. Structures where the firewood was placed directly against the wall of the house. At first glance, it seems inconvenient, but in reality, it was a silent masterpiece of climate engineering. The first advantage is something medieval builders understood instinctively: heat leakage. Even the simplest cottage with gaps between the logs and primitive insulation still radiates a steady stream of warmth through the walls. Not enough to heat the whole yard, but enough to create a narrow strip of air only 3 to 5 degrees warmer than the icy world outside. That small increase in heat prevented nighttime moisture from settling on the logs and encouraged a current of air, continuously carrying moisture away rather than retaining it. And then they had a second insight. An understanding of wind that modern homeowners rarely. They stored the wood on the leeward side of the house, sheltered from the harshest storms but exposed to steady, gentle breezes. In Norway, farmers stacked the wood vertically, slightly leaning inward to create natural air channels between each. They covered only the top with bark or rough planks, leaving the sides fully exposed to the wind. It was a system designed not to block the weather, but to work with it. Modern researchers have tested this technique using reconstructed Viking houses. The results were astonishing. Wood stored the medieval way against a warm, open wall reduced moisture to about 18% in just 6.5. Meanwhile, the same wood stored in a modern closed shed often took over a year and still refused to dry properly. By letting the house itself act as a catalyst, medieval families cut drying time in half. No electricity, no kilns, no plastic sheets, just wind, warmth, and an understanding of physics, so simple and elegant that we almost forgot it ever existed. And in the next chapter, we will step into a structure that looks less like a wood pile and more like a sculpture. And it may be one of the greatest drying machines ever invented. Part 4. The geometry of Holzhausen as a battery. But what happens when a medieval family has more than their house walls could hold? When winters are long, forests vast, and survival demands a reserve lasting not just months, but seasons. That is when German and Scandinavian farmers turned to one of the wonders of firewood engineering ever created. A structure so impressive it looks like a sculpture, yet so practical it can keep wood perfectly dry for years. They called it the Holzhausen, the wood house. Imagine a freestanding cylinder of stacked logs, 3 meters tall and 3 meters wide, rising like a tower of wood in the yard. Its shape was not chosen for beauty, though it has plenty of beauty. The circular shape serves a much more important purpose: stability. As wood, it shrinks and shifts. A straight stack bows outward and collapses, but a round stack settles inward, tightening over time, growing stronger with age. Yet the true genius of the Holzhausen is not its strength, but its thermodynamics. The sun warms the outer layers of the logs, heating the air trapped inside the structure. And because the inner pieces are loosely stacked, some vertical, some tilted, some irregular, the warm air can rise freely through the center. As it rises, it creates a natural draft that pulls dry air from below. This continuous upward flow forms what medieval farmers intuitively understood as the chimney effect, a silent convection engine, a natural self-regulating dryer, a giant passive thermal battery with no operating costs, but repaying everything. And to complete the design, they topped the Holzhausen woodpile with a roof made of logs, arranged with the bark facing upward to form a rustic thatch. Rain would beat up and roll off, while the whole structure remained breathable. Even the twisted, lightweight pieces, things most people would discard, were tossed into the center to improve airflow and save the effort of splitting. The result was a woodpile that dried faster, stored longer, and withstood storms that could destroy a modern shed. A perfect marriage of geometry, airflow, and patience. And as we go further, this ancient mastery of materials becomes even more extraordinary, because the medieval science of wood did not stop in the backyard. It penetrated deep into the forests themselves. Part 5. The Coppice Legacy, the forest that never dies. The forgotten science of firewood did not begin in the woodshed. It began deep in the forest itself. Long before medieval families stacked a single log beside their home, they made a decision that shaped their entire future. They did not cut down the forest. They taught the forest to regenerate itself. For thousands of years across Europe, families practiced an ancient method called coppicing instead of felling giant old-growth trees. The heavy giants demanded days of splitting and weeks of labor. They worked with something far smarter: the understory. They would cut broadleaf trees like hazel, willow, or ash right at the base. And instead of dying, these trees responded with explosive vitality, sprouting dozens of slender shoots. The shoots were uniform. Each one grew fast, straight, and perfectly sized for firewood. This was not just forestry. It was renewable energy engineering from centuries before the term existed, because these small diameter branches had an incredible advantage. Their high surface area to volume ratio meant they dried extremely fast. No splitting, no heavy axe work. Just uniform, clean sticks that could season in a year. Medieval families tied them tightly into what they called faggots, compact bundles of sticks that burned very hot. Clean and reliable, this fuel can be depended on every winter without ever failing. And this is not a rare practice. Studies from regions like Moravia show that nearly every lowland forest was once managed through the method of coppicing. The entire landscape was shaped not by chance, but by deliberate human design. Villages were not simply about timber extraction. They cultivated energy, creating endlessly regenerating forests, producing a steady, easily dried fuel supply for generations. To medieval people, a coppiced forest was not just a source of wood, it was a living battery, a renewable engine. A forest designed never to die. And as we move into the next part of this journey, we will see that once the wood was harvested and dried, medieval engineers did something even more brilliant. They turned stone into a heat reservoir, capable of heating entire homes long after the fire died. Part 6. Thermal Mass: How Stones Remember. By the time medieval households had perfectly seasoned wood, dried by wind, warmed by walls, or processed by the elegant geometry of a Holzhausen, they didn't simply toss it into a drafty fireplace and hope for warmth. No, they combined that precious fuel with one of the old world's most brilliant survival inventions, the thermal mass. In great fortresses like Malbork Castle in Poland, engineers understood what most modern homes overlook. Air loses heat quickly, but stone remembers. And so, deep beneath the floors, they built chambers filled with tons of granite. A single fire burning for just 3.5 hours was enough to heat those stones so that they radiated warmth upward for 3 to 5 days. Imagine that. Days of steady warmth. A comfortable warmth generated by just one carefully timed fire. That's not magic, it's engineering. This is a true thermal battery, storing heat the way modern devices store electricity. Instead of maintaining a fire all night, they heated mass, not air. And in doing so, they created warmth that lasted long after the flame died. Even ordinary townhouses had their own versions. The Kachelofen, or tiled stove, these massive ceramic hearths often weighed 2 tons, and inside was a labyrinth of brick channels, capturing every last bit of heat from the fire's exhaust. You would only light the fire for 90 minutes, and then, for the next 24 hours, it would radiate a gentle warmth like sunlight imprisoned in stone. The contrast with modern heating is almost embarrassing. A typical open fireplace today wastes most of the energy, capturing only about 15% of the heat it generates. But a medieval masonry stove? It achieves up to 90% efficiency, 20 times more effective. No electricity, no fan, no automation. It's just physics, patience, and an unbroken chain of inherited wisdom. And as we continue, the story becomes even more impressive, because this knowledge wasn't lost by accident. It was abandoned. And what disappeared with it was not only technique, but resilience itself. Part 7. The Modern Betrayal. Why did we forget? So the question becomes unavoidable. If medieval households mastered such an effective system, so reliable and brilliantly simple, why did we stop using it? Why in 2025 are so many of us still struggling with damp firewood, smoky stoves, and winter heating bills that feel like punishment? The turning point came after World War II across Europe and North America. Electrification swept in like a miracle. Gas pipelines expanded, oil became cheap, and almost overnight, firewood turned from a survival tool into a decorative item, something you burn for ambiance rather than to live. And with that shift, ancient knowledge began to fade, techniques passed down through centuries. Stacking firewood against a warm wall, Choosing harvest timing, building a perfect Holzhausen, relying on airflow instead of plastic, gradually slipped from memory. Skills that once kept entire villages alive suddenly came to be seen as outdated, unnecessary, or simply too much work for a world chasing convenience. We didn't lose the knowledge, we abandoned it. Instead of designing houses that could naturally dry our firewood, we started buying kiln-dried logs at a premium. Instead of using high-temperature fires to keep chimneys clean, we began paying hundreds of dollars to scrape creosote out of chimneys clogged by damp firewood, the same firewood we had poorly stored in the first place. Little by little, industry filled the void left by forgotten, and ironically, the worse we become at storing and burning wood, the more it benefits others to fix the problems we create. Damp wood became normal, smoky fires became expected, and resilience, that quiet, powerful self-reliance our ancestors built. Their lives were traded for speed, simplicity, and convenience. But the truth is that old methods didn't disappear because they failed. They disappeared because modern life convinced us we no longer needed them. Yet, as energy costs soar and winters grow harsher, forgotten techniques are no longer mere historical curiosities. They are the key to reclaiming a kind of independence we didn't realize we had lost. And in the next chapter, we will bring those lessons back into the modern world and show exactly how you can use medieval techniques to heat your home more efficiently, safely, and sustainably today. Part 8. Bringing Science Home. Survival for the Future. This is the part modern listeners never expected. You don't need a medieval longhouse, a Viking stable, or a stone castle to use any ancient firewood science today. In fact, the genius of these old techniques lies in how easily they integrate into modern life, whether you live in a log cabin in the woods, a suburban house, or anywhere in between. You can start with the simplest principle of all, the attached woodshed. Build a lean-to against your house or garage wall. Keep the front open and the sides airy. Let the wall leak a little warmth. Raise the wood off the ground. Only cover the top, and then, like medieval farmers did for centuries, let the air flow, not plastic, do the work. With just a breeze and slight temperature differences, your firewood will dry faster and cleaner than most modern storage methods ever allow. And if you have an open yard, you can go one step further. Try building a Holzhausen, not only visually impressive, like something between a sculpture and a monument, but also one of the most stable, efficient, and self-regulating firewood drying structures ever invented. No permanent construction, no electricity, no machinery, just geometry, sunlight, and the natural chimney effect. Because the medieval farmer wasn't lucky, he wasn't guessing. He was an observer. He understood that nature always provides survival tools if you know how to arrange them. No guessing. And today, in a world with rising energy costs, harsher winters, and increasing dependence on fragile modern systems, these forgotten methods return not as curiosities, but as lifelines. They remind us that resilience doesn't always come from new technology. Sometimes it hides in old wisdom waiting to be revived. The past is offering us a blueprint for the future, and all we need to do is pick up the first log. Part 9. Conclusion. The Fire of Knowledge. In the end, the greatest survival technology is not something delivered in a box with prime shipping. It is not a gadget, a device, or a new invention promising easy warmth. The most powerful tool you have is knowledge. Knowledge that has survived 8 centuries of storms, winters, and human experience. It is the understanding that stone remembers warmth longer than air ever does. It will be the understanding that airflow is more valuable than any plastic coating, and realizing that a house is not just a place to live, it is, and always has been, a thermodynamic engine capable of keeping you alive if you know how to use it. So next time you stack firewood, pause for a moment, look at it through the eyes of your ancestors, and ask yourself if this is a mold trap waiting to fail, or is it a medieval thermal battery quietly storing energy that will keep your family warm. If this journey into forgotten science has helped you see the world a little differently, then hit subscribe and ring the bell on Heritage Core. We revive long-lost knowledge every week, because modern systems may fail, but wisdom, True wisdom outlasts everything. And now, I want to hear from you. What primitive skill do you believe we should bring back in 2025? Which lost method deserves a second life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching Heritage Core. Keep the fire burning and stay warm.